everybody, and welcome to the second in our series of Urban Transport Next conversations with a live online audience on the topics that will help determine the future of urban transport. So whether you're spending your lunchtime with us listening live, or whether you're listening to the podcast later or watching the playback on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jonathan Bray, Director of the Urban Transport Group, the organisation that's hosting these events. For those of you who don't know us, we bring together the transport authorities for the largest urban areas, so Transport for London, Transport for Greater Manchester, Transport for West Midlands, and all the other major metro areas, serving 20 million people across the country. And as well as being a body that thinks ahead about what next for urban transport, our members can implement that thinking on the ground and can and do learn collectively from these events. I'm really pleased that so many people have signed up to take part in this event. I think it was over 150, and delighted that we have such a great panel for this conversation. And what is a key issue for the transport sector, which is how does it better reflect the diversity of the places and people it serves? And we have two great speakers for you on this. Staynton Brown, who is Director of Diversity, Inclusion and Talent at Transport for London. Staynton has held a number of senior roles in his career, including at the Learning and Skills Council, where he led on social inclusion, equality and project management, as an Associate Director at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust Hospital, and Assistant Director in the Lambeth Public Health Team. It's always great to hear from TfL. There's always lots we can all learn, given TfL's scale, its creativity and its commitment. Our second speaker is Joanna Ward, an Associate Transport Planner at Structural and Civil Engineering Practice Elliott Wood Partnership. Joanna is an active member of Women in Transport, a Board Director of the Transport Planning Society, as well as a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Cycling and Walking Group. And it's good that we've got someone from Women in Transport in particular, as this week at long last, we had our first chair of the Urban Transport Group elected, who is a woman. That's Laura Schoaf, who leads Transport for West Midlands. So some progress there. And our host for the conversation is Clare Linton, who is our policy and research advisor at the Urban Transport Group, who, among many other things, plays a leading role for us on our collective work on people, skills, diversity and organisational development. So you can also be part of this conversation by putting your questions, keep them short and sharp, please, in the channel on Zoom. You can also upvote for your questions that you most want answered, and we'll be picking up on those in the final section of the conversation. We also have the comments channel where you can make more general comments, but that might not necessarily be picked up as the questions. And of course, on Twitter, using the hashtag UTGNext. So that's hashtag UTGNext. So with that, I will hand over to Clare.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I'm really pleased that we've got this hour slot here to discuss diversity in the transport sector. It's a really important subject. It's really close to my heart, and it's really close to the work that we've been doing at Urban Transport Group over recent years, sort of trying to push forward with this and support our members in tackling diversity in the transport sector. So I think to kick us off, it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit from our panellists about their career journeys, about their experience and how they ended up in the transport sector. So I'd invite Staynton to give us a little bit of background about his career and his journey first, and then we'll hear from Joe after that.
Thanks, Claire. It's great to be here for the next hour or so. I'll do my best to answer the questions that will be shared as the session goes on. And a great credit need to go to the Urban Transport Group, Claire and the team in getting this set up, because it's fiendishly difficult, as we're all contending with at the moment with lockdown 3. I saw LD3 as an acronym. It was sent to me via text the other day, and really got me thinking about just the kind of the crazy events that we're all having to contend with. So my career journey. I mean, I never intended to get into transport when I was growing up in Dudley. I'm from the Midlands originally. I studied economics, and then I was really interested in issues of social justice. That's very important to me. And so I decided to take a career in the probation service. And so when I started off my career, I trained as a probation officer. I worked with high risk offenders. It was the most incredible experience for me. It kind of really showed me the importance of listening and listening intently, and how difficult sometimes it is to really tune your ear in. And if you didn't listen properly, then you probably wouldn't be able to make a proper assessment as whether someone was likely to reoffend or not. But it also showed me the issues with regard to biases as well, very unconscious and cognitive biases too, which have a bearing on your ability to do your job, which is to keep the public safe. But when I left the probation service, I realised I wanted to get into more of a policy formulation strategy type role, because it was clear to me that to lead good, healthy lives, there are lots of things that are interconnected. So you need green spaces, you need good well-being and good health, access to education, employment as well. All of these things are really important to think about very carefully for me to try to make some sort of impact in creating fairer and more equal communities where people live the best lives that they can. So I work for the Learning and Skills Council nationally, looking at social impact and policy and so forth. And then I got a fantastic job in public health in Lambeth, and that was absolutely fantastic because you got to understand the wide determinants of poor health, and that's access to green spaces I've touched on already, access to transport, clean air, isolation, social isolation. So public health was an incredible grounding. It was brilliant for me just to think beyond the four walls of an academic discipline. And then I worked in the NHS, and as a director role there, I've covered a number of different areas and worked across 3 hospitals and also university on social impact and social mobility programs. And then I got a job, luckily, in Transport for London, where a lot of the learning I've had in my career was really brought to the fore, particularly now with the decarbonisation agenda, active travel. So that's a bit of a potted history. I could go on for this all day, but I'll hand back to you, Claire.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Staynton. And I think it's probably a theme that will come up later when we think about sort of career paths into the transport sector. But I think a lot of people sort of fall into the transport sector and kind of don't. It's not something people always think about going for as a career path, but kind of come from other sectors or from different kind of disciplines. So, and Jo, would you like to tell us a little bit about your career path and experience in the transport sector?
Thank you. It's really lovely to be here today and really nice to chat with both of you. I'm another person who didn't set out to become a transport planner. I moved about quite a lot when I was growing up. So just through my parents' work, I lived in the countryside till I was 10, and I moved to Lambeth when I was 10. So I've lived in the Lambeth Walk, so I know Lambeth really well. And I just I was really curious about how people get about. I'm quite nosy. I want to know why people need to go where they need to go and how do they get there. I also became determined that you didn't have to have a car to be able to do that. So why should that be the default setting, that we assume everybody's got a car and that becomes the kind of thing? So I went to Derby University and studied geography. And then I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I got a job at West Sussex County Council working in traffic calming when that was the done thing. And I've kind of worked my way through transport ever since. I've worked for a number of different consultancies, local authorities, and I worked for the charity sector for a long time with Sustrans. And I'm just really interested in how people get to places, why they can't get to places, why those barriers are in place, why do they have to be? And I kind of, sort of by accident, got involved with the Transport Planning Society and Women in Transport, and became an advocate for asking difficult questions as to why we don't have a more diverse transport sector. So why is it that I find myself in a conference where I'm the youngest person there and the only woman? Why is that? Why has that ever happened? And what are we going to do to overturn that? I've written quite a lot about why I think we need more people involved in the discussions we have around transport, and I'm sure that'll come up in the conversation. But it's my belief that if we don't all get involved, and that doesn't just mean transport professionals, that just means everybody as part of the community, how can we ever intend to plan something for everybody? Because we just can't know what everybody's thinking. So I find myself at Elliott Wood as the head of the transport team, and just working in transport to try and make those kind of pathways a bit more available to people.
Great, thanks very much, Jo. So I think sort of to kick off the conversation around diversity in the transport sector, I think it'd be really useful to have a bit of a reflection on where we are now and kind of, what have we already achieved in terms of improving diversity in the transport sector, but also a bit of a stock take to think about what does the transport sector look like, so we kind of know where we're going, and when we start to think about what we can do about it, we kind of know where we're starting from. So I'll stay with Jo if that's okay, and I know you've written quite extensively about sort of women in transport planning, but yeah, if you could just give us a few reflections on where we are in terms of diversity in the transport sector.
Well, I think we're probably doing better than we were, but I certainly don't think it's good enough. I think we can do a lot better, which is not I'm not trying to just give a kind of easy answer. I think there needs to be some more research into this. I don't think there is enough research and there isn't enough evidence of who's working, so we know where we need to get to. And Women Transport are doing some research at the moment about the gender split in terms of people working in transport. And we need some more men to answer, because we're women in transport, but we're all about more diversity in transport. So I think if you look on our social media channels, you can find that survey at the moment. We've got some good responses, but we need some more men to take part so we get some kind of good body of evidence. But in kind of the different areas of diversity that we think about in terms of gender and race and sex and disability and economic background, I'm not sure we know enough about that. And I think there is probably some issues that we need to unpick in terms of it being open to a certain sector of society, and therefore people making appointments of people that look like them. And that's just not good enough. It's just not acceptable in the world that we're in at the moment. And if we want to, and I do believe transport is firmly part of the recovery from the pandemic, and also in order to deal with the other crisis that we've got going on that hasn't gone away, the climate crisis, we've got to think about how we make things accessible to everybody. So from building new houses to being in meetings, we've got to call out and say, now, is this really doing what it's supposed to do? Who are the people not in the room and who's not getting their say? And we've got to be disruptive and turn things on their head and listen to the voices that we're not hearing.
Great, thanks very much, Jo. And Staynton, your reflections on sort of where we are now in terms of diversity, and it'd be interesting to hear a bit about sort of TfL and sort of how TfL are doing on diversity at the moment as well.
Yeah, I think, I agree with everything that Jo's already said. I mean, just specifically with regard to kind of TfL, one of the incredible things about my job, and one of the reasons I absolutely love it, is because, it covers both customer facing accessibility and inclusivity, how we create an inclusively designed transport network, as also the diversity, inclusion and talent piece on the people side, because, genuinely see, and there are lots of examples where if we do have a much greater representation of people in senior leadership positions and in our own organisation, we're much better able to innovate on behalf of all people who come into the capital, because everybody, there'll be different types of needs, different requirements that people will sometimes take. And one of the things that I've always said to people in my time at TfL has been, if, let's say, London was wholly designed by people with any mobility impairments or mobility requirements, or older people, the place and space would feel incredibly different, and probably would be more accessible for everybody. So I think that interconnectedness is, for me, that's the business case of this. I know the business case has been spoken about for many years. But I think at TfL, we really have been able to demonstrate and show, okay, if we have people who are neurodiverse on one of our development and training programs, or employability programs, or we've recruited, as we have done over a number of years, people into customer service assistant roles, we've been much better able to think about signage, wayfinding, and just make our whole transport network much more accessible and inclusive. In terms of kind of where we are, I think, we are doing okay. And I think there's a huge amount of work led by transport operators across the country, universities, to try and make transport careers more attractive to different groups of people, rather than the typical, characterization of it's a young male, typically a young white male who'll want to be involved in kind of working on trains. And so I think there's a huge amount that's been done nationally to to make the transport industry much more attractive, and it has to start really early. So we've worked for years with the London Transport Museum and engaging with people at school age, people who are about to choose their A-levels, people about to go to university. So I think that's incredibly important, that we're seeing different groups of people wanting to come into transport. I think the main kind of challenge, I think, for us is there's one thing attracting people in, and now it's really important that people are able to develop in their careers. And what we're wanting to see, in transport, you typically have relatively long lengths of service. We're wanting to see much greater mobility, lateral moves within our own organisation, and people progressing as well, if they were to so choose, into more senior roles. So that's the really big challenge for us. But we have targets that are in our scorecard. That's ultimately the accountability for the delivery. We have to report to the mayor because he's the chair of our board. So we've always placed, having a more representative senior management team as well as the wider organisation on our top scorecard. So we've made steady progress there, but I really want to get and see more people progress and develop their careers to be a
Great, thanks very much. And one of the other things I was thinking about in terms of thinking about where we are on diversity is, I think, thinking about the different roles within the transport sector. So I was having a look at what stats were out there, and luckily DfT's workforce data is available to have a look at, and they're sort of showing that they are 59% male and 41% female. So not quite 50-50, but, getting there. But then if we look at some of the more sort of conventional transport roles, sort of railway engineers, we're only seeing 4.4% women in railway engineering. And then I was having a look at train drivers, and for train drivers, only 8% of train drivers are from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background. So as a sector as a whole, we might be making some progress, but are there kind of areas that are still very, very sticky that we're still kind of having real trouble with, and we might be seeing sort of an ageing workforce in those spaces? Stacey, I don't know if you have any reflections on that sort of from Linton and your perspective across the sector.
Yeah, we do. I mean, a way to describe it is, there is still occupational segregation, if you like, within different professional groups within transport. I mean, we have really put a huge amount of focus in making sure our train manager recruitment campaigns are hitting lots of different spaces and places, communities, and I've thought very carefully also about the stories that are relayed in terms of it being a career for anybody. Just to buck up against some of the stereotypes and the unconscious biases that we all have about, who we would think would typically be a train driver. So I think that, there are still a good number of roles in engineering. I worked at the university before I was in this role. And one of the things that was quite clear was that, and Joe may have a comment on this too, that, when men or women or people from different ethnic backgrounds and so forth are about to choose their sciences, there might have been an early kind of real interest in, say, engineering. But when they go to choose their sciences and then go and progress through their degrees, they decide to go down, say, the medical route rather than taking a fantastic career within transport. So I think there's still a hell of a lot to do in very specific professions. If I look at our organisation, over 50% of new external appointees in senior roles have been women, for example. And so we've been able to make pretty good kind of increased improvements there. But there are some kind of trickier areas, and we've got to look at how attractive those spaces are and those roles are. We've got to think differently about how we talk about those roles as well. They are, I think, hugely attractive if we speak about them in the right way. And then we've got to make sure that when people start in those roles, they are genuinely inclusive environments. And I think that's a challenge for any profession that has a majority population. There are norms and customs that form over a hell of a long time. So we want to make sure that when people come in, they also want to stay as well. So that's why we focus both on increasing the representation, but also we've got to make sure those cultures and environments are genuinely inclusive, and those people coming in are given as much support as possible, because they will be often groundbreaking. They sometimes will be the only woman or someone from a Black and Asian minority background at a particular depot. That's not so much the case in TfL, actually. The BAME representation is pretty good on train drivers, but that's what we've got to focus on. It's the representation, but also then really make sure the environment is inclusive.
Great, thanks very much, Staynton. And Jo, do you have some reflections on this kind of different parts of the transport sector?
Yeah, I think the transport sector has probably got to stop hiding its light under a bushel and start promoting itself as a really interesting career. I think we've been quite shy as transport professionals to say, actually, I quite like this. It's quite a good job. You know, it's interesting. Well, I think it's interesting and different, but you know what I mean? I think we need to promote ourselves a bit more. I mean, goodness knows, a key example in Nottingham before Christmas last year or the year before, we had some problems with a bridge in Nottingham, and people were suddenly saying, well, why can't I get into Nottingham? Who looks after this? And you want to come back with thousands of people working transport every day, which means that in the world before COVID, you could get to work on time. And we just don't question that enough. It's just because it works and it happens, and we don't think who does it until something goes wrong. So I think we need to all be a bit prouder of where we work and shout out about that. But I think there's also this kind of, I think you're right, Staynton, I think we need to capture this kind of interest at an earlier age in terms of kids. All kids that I know, and I've got godchildren and a nephew, really love going to look at trains and seeing trains, and they're really interested in transport and diggers and dust, you know, all those kind of things. And then it changes and it becomes that's a boy's activity and that's a girl's activity. We need to kind of unpick that and ask why that is and why we kind of shout down that excitement about that kind of moving around and how people move and how we do all that stuff. So I think there's a lot of work for all of us to do in kind of advocating for what a fantastic career it is.
I agree. I absolutely agree. It was one of the things I wanted to pick up earlier, but we've kind of already started to touch on it, but it's sort of inspiring the next generation of transport planners. And I have a theory that one of the reasons we lose people is to do with their school transport and the experiences of travelling to school, because I have very traumatic memories of the school bus being a horrible place to be. And I have this theory that we kind of lose the teenage years because of the school bus experience. So maybe we need to think about school transport and how we could improve that. And maybe that would help to keep people's interest. And also, I was just thinking about reflecting on the careers in transport and how we sell those careers in transport. And it struck me, Staynton, in your introduction, you talked about having impact in your career in social justice and those kind of, aspirations and ideas as something you want to build into a career. And I don't feel we maybe do enough of talking about the impact that transport has on people and the value in those transport careers. You got any sort of reflections on that from your perspective?
Yeah, building on the question, Claire, and Jo's point as well. One of the things, because I'm relatively new in the transport world, and I think when I started at TfL, the huge amounts of pride in the knowledge, capability, expertise that people had learned and developed through their careers, whether they are working in city planning, spatial planning, transport planning, engineers, people working in assets and renewals. There's just an incredible sense of professional pride, and I think that across transport, a better job, as Jo has already kind of touched on, can be done in really kind of amplifying that pride to more people, and not just the pride, but the genuine enjoyment people get. So I think the one of the things that really struck with me was just people could see the influence that they were having on their local communities, whether that be a customer service assistant or customer services manager, whether that's someone working on the Northern Line extension, whether it's making a contribution in whatever guise to building Crossrail and getting Crossrail over the line. Just a huge amount of pride and a huge amount of technical expertise and competence really honed over the years, and people could see their role and the impact it will have for years to come as well. So that really struck me very, very quickly when I started at TfL. I didn't know a huge amount about TfL other than what had been people read about in the papers at the start. So I think a better job, of really kind of conveying that, I think is important. The last thing I'll touch on really is that we are lucky. We recruit hundreds of apprentices and graduates every year, and we've recruited thousands over the last kind of 8 or 9 years or so. And seeing them start to then develop and see where they go with their careers, and talking to them about what attracted them into into transport. It's helped us to be able to decide, how best do we market ourselves as a transport network? How do we bring in more people from within the organisation who are just doing their jobs with a huge amount of pride, actually bringing them closer to people at school age and people who are leaving university. And that's been incredibly fruitful to see, because it's just helped us to be able to understand, what are the sweet spots that will really make transport a really, really attractive career.
Great, thanks very much. That leads me nicely into a question about sort of attracting talent and how we attract diverse talent. We kind of talked around it a little bit, but I'm interested in sort of some really practical and specific advice about how you can go about attracting diverse talent to the transport sector. So we'll start with Jo, and then I'll come to Staynton after that.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think it's about attracting people, and as Staynton touched on, keeping people. So I think that retention thing is really a kind of key thing. So I think we need to be looking at whether we can be, how flexible as employers can we be? Obviously, if you're a train driver, you need to be there on time to drive the trains that you're supposed to be driving. But with some of the kind of more kind of in the background type roles, how can we be more flexible employers? Making sure that we're really friendly in the kind of things that we're doing. I think that's kind of it's really key, isn't it? But it doesn't always feel like that. And then seeing things from other people's perspectives. So thinking about how can we make this work for people who've got kids or other commitments, and how can they make a career in this work for them? So are we able to be much more flexible? And also always asking who's not in the room, who is not here, and how can we reach out to them? Because you can only, when you're recruiting, you can only pick from the best people that come forward for that role. But if people aren't putting themselves forward, or we're not encouraging them to put themselves forward, then we're not getting a complete, choice from the best talent out there. And I think there is more to be uncovered. I think there's some huge gaps in the transport industry. I think we lost a lot of people during the recession, and we've never really recovered from that. There are some gaps at that kind of level in terms of management, and we've never really recovered from that. And I'm really worried that we are going to lose people through the things that have happened to all of us in the last year, through the horrendous year that we've lived through, and that we're not going to be able to recover that back. So we've got to be thinking now, how are we going to keep the people we've got, and how are we going to encourage more people to get into it? Because, as you said, Staynton, what other career do you get to influence what other people do every day of their lives, in their lives? What a privilege to be able to do that. And we want to make sure we're doing that for the most amount of people. And if you're not represented in that, so we need to work as employers to make sure that we encourage people to come forward, and that they feel that they can be part of it. And I think the other thing that just finally I'll say is showing real examples. So going back to we need to shout about more about what we do. It's a responsibility of all of us working in the transport sector, showing how we can make it work in terms of coming from different backgrounds, having different kids, living in different places. I don't live in London, and this pandemic has changed everything in terms of the fact that we can be speaking to each other this lunchtime, can't we? Doesn't matter where we are. That's changed some things, and I don't want to see that go. So I do, although in person is really important, I want to see some of these things that have changed really stay, because they make the industry much more accessible.
Brilliant, thanks, Jo. I think there's some really interesting points to come back to there around flexibility in careers, and also about looking at who's in the room and who's not in the room. But first of all, just ask Staynton to reflect on this point about attracting diverse talent, and also I think as well how we attract talent to the public sector in terms of I know that kind of pay can sometimes be lower in the public sector, and particularly for sort of tech careers, it can be even more difficult to attract that talent. So some reflections there on sort of attracting diverse talent.
Well, it's part of my job, and one of the things I'm responsible for is executive recruitment. We have an in-house executive recruitment team, and it's something that we chew over and think about all the time in terms of attracting senior talent, but also looking at people coming in. And one of the things I'm also looking at, responsible for, is longer-term strategic workforce planning as well. So we think about this very, very kind of carefully. Regularly. I think the main things, I suppose, for me, and kind of practical examples, and I think Jo's already touched on this, is being really quite big and bold and setting out real life lived examples of people's experiences in different careers within transport, and that makes a hell of a difference. When we are really able to kind of curate a genuinely kind of diverse and inclusive campaign. So, we've got roles that might typically be seen as being very operational in nature, but they do allow themselves for people to have quite flexible working hours and arrangements, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman. So really, it's been really important to us to sell the flexible working benefits, to look at when we think about kind of millennials and kind of digital natives, what are the things very much on their minds in terms of what's important to them in terms of their careers. So sustainability, the decarbonisation agenda, that's incredibly important. It's important for us all, but we are able to track that through working and looking at the insights from places like LinkedIn and other recruitment sites to give us a good understanding as to what is it people really care about, and then how can we make sure that we reflect that in terms of our corporate values, our policies, reward and compensation and that sort of thing. So we're having to constantly refine our kind of approach to attracting people in based on the latest industry insights. But we also know the types of things that we'll be delivering over the next kind of 3, 4, 5 years as well. So that's really exciting too. So it's again, how do you bring that more so to life? Do you want to be involved in helping to design streetscapes in parts of London and particular boroughs? So we've been working really hard to bring those real life examples to life. And I think lastly, we can look at kind of pay benchmarking and that type of thing when one looks at the private versus public sector, and any employer is constantly kind of reviewing and refreshing kind of reward and wanting to make sure that it's competitive. I guess to get people into the public sector, I think it's really, really setting that kind of the vocational element, as well as it being a great place to work where people will be well looked after, and not just the individual but their families as well. So I think most public bodies do a relatively good job at that, actually. I also, just last thing I should say, I think it's important for organisations like our own to be confident in letting people go into the private sector for short periods of time and then be able to come back, because it's really important that we develop people's breadth of knowledge and experience too. So we should confidently encourage people on occasion to go elsewhere and then come back. And I think that only benefits customers and the work.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Staynton. And it's interesting, I was thinking about what you were just saying about the decarbonisation agenda and attracting people into transport. That's kind of why I went into transport. I was particularly interested in sustainability, and I thought that transport was an interesting dimension of it because people interact with it every day in a way they don't necessarily with energy, because you just sort of switch on a light and you don't really think about it, whereas you make travel choices every day. And that was kind of what attracted me to transport and the sustainability aspects of it. I just wanted to pick up on Joe's point about the people in the room and looking at the people in the room, and also reflecting on how we potentially support the people who might face barriers and become a good ally to people who might face barriers. So again, speaking from my own experience, I remember being in a meeting and I was the only woman in the room and I was the only non-white person in the room. And I was really struggling to be heard. I was putting my hand up and I wasn't being called on by the chair. And another colleague in the room raised his hand and said, Clare is trying to speak here, and brought me into the conversation. And afterwards he spoke to me and he said, I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to do. I wasn't sure if that was patronising. And I said, no, that I felt heard, I felt seen. I really appreciated you making space for me there. So what else can we do to kind of support the people in the room who might not be being heard or might feel kind of like the minority, like being the only woman, being the only non-white person in that space, however else they might feel excluded? Joe?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good example, Claire. I also have an example of early in my career where I worked in highways maintenance for a little while. I went to a winter maintenance conference in Nottingham. I can remember it now. I was the youngest person and the only woman in that room, and I thought, oh my gosh, goodness. And I'm sure they thought, oh my goodness, who's walked into this room? I think there's something about changing our behaviours And we are transport people, so we should be really good at that, because we're all about getting people to change their behaviours and talking to them about it on the thing that hooks them. So is that the climate crisis? Is that about equality? Is it about social justice? What is it just about, travelling better, more exercise, all those kind of things? So we should be really good at this. I think that being an ally is really important. I think we should be really curious about who's not in the room. And I don't think it's wrong to, if you're not sure about something, to ask questions. People will be happy to be corrected. So, for example, Transport Planning Society are I look after diversity and inclusion for the Transport Planning Society. We're not doing as well as we should be. We wanted to do some work on in light of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I've been talking with some colleagues that have come forward and want to be part of that. And I wasn't quite sure how to talk about that. That's not the group that I'm from. So being able to say to them in a comfortable environment, how should we refer to this? How should we refer to backgrounds? And I think people are quite genuine. If you're interested and respect people, they'll be quite happy to tell you the correct way to talk about these things, be that gender, disability, background. So I think it's okay. I hope that's okay. I think it's okay to ask those questions. I certainly would appreciate people asking me those questions, and say it's okay to say, I don't know how we're going to deal with this, and to go and find somebody who can help you with that. So I think we don't have to have all the answers, but we need to be prepared to ask those difficult questions. And in terms of that, who's not in the room, we need to think about the way that we do all sorts of things. So an example is public consultation on projects. Often the people that get heard are the people who shout the loudest. And traditionally, before these times, we've done them in old church halls, haven't we, on a weeknight evening when it's convenient, and given people 2 examples of things they might go for. Well, there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, will not go out in the evening, will not shout up, and will not be able to go because of the other commitments that they've got. So we've got to open up those communication channels with the rest of the community, for them to be able to comment on that, so that we can think differently. And we've also got to think, as transport professionals, it's not the easiest route for us to be able to use that's going to be the right route. We've got to think about the community that are using that. So take it right back to the community we're working with.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jo. There's some really good points there that I think we'll definitely come back to around Black Lives Matter and the consultation perspectives as well. But just first thinking about Staynton, about that point about how we support people in the room and being a good ally, if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had those experiences personally myself, and it's something that's often relayed to me. And there's quite a lot of research out there in terms of how to be a good ally. Being curious, listening intently, being inclusive by asking people questions, even if sometimes they haven't yet raised their hand. And just being able to think about, not just being able to think, actually, I should say, sorry, being very cognizant of the fact that people think differently, approach things differently, and I think that it's really important that if there is a chair in a meeting, they're well skilled in being an inclusive chair. But even if one's not chairing a meeting, just being quite clear in terms of how do we want to make sure that we get the most out of meetings? Because quite frankly, organisations around the world spend billions on meetings, and so if you're not getting the best out of everybody in the room, that's also an incredible waste of money. So we're doing quite a bit of work at the moment, actually, in light of all things kind of COVID and kind of ways of working. We're doing a ways of working review just to make sure that things like meetings, we are getting the most out of them and everybody feels involved and included. And just building on in terms of that listening piece. And I know you're going to come to Black Lives Matter, but we after the events of the summer and the outpouring of upset, frustration, the desire to really want to make sure that we were a genuinely anti-racist organisation. We kicked off. There've been over 100 listening sessions held across the organisation. Thousands of people have been able to tune and be involved in them. And I won't go into the detail yet, because I can imagine there'll be questions about this a bit later. But what the power of those listening sessions meant that you've had many people in more senior leadership roles, often on panels, listening and hearing directly from from people that they work with and they are responsible for in that business area as to the things that really matter to them. One of those has been, being unheard when I am in the room, or microaggressions and so forth. Stuff that we'd already know, but it's the how's been more important, if you like, than the what. And the how is being, okay, rather than the latest policy kind of research or data being pulled in for people to review and assess, actually just talking to people. And it's okay to make mistakes, but really, really listen to people, creating safe psychological environments where people feel able to speak about things in work and outside of work. And it's gone down incredibly well in our organisation. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thank you. Maybe we'll stick with that subject on the Black Lives Matter. And Staynton, I think what you've said there about the listening sessions is really interesting, really valuable, and it's something we've sort of been disseminating across our network with our UTG members, sharing the learning that you've got from that. But I wonder if you want to say anything else, kind of just touching on Black Lives Matter and kind of how the transport sector has responded. And Staynton, if we stay with you for now, and then perhaps we can hear a bit about what the Transport Planning Society are having a think around this too.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a really, really interesting time if I was to go back to kind of May, June time, because we're just in the midst of contending with lockdown, and in our own organisation, we were slightly ahead of the curve, I think, in making sure that we rolled out risk assessments for people who might be more at risk of complications owing to COVID. And some people might have seen in the press that the Mayor was very clear that we ought to roll out, based on just the headline data, of vulnerable people and BAME COVID risk assessment. And so all of that was happening at the same time. So I think in terms of the Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd, it felt like at the time there was this crescendo of lots of things that weren't fully understood. But we're quite clear, that there is, of course, structural inequality that still exists within society, and that was being played out through people who are more likely to die owing to COVID, people who are older, and so forth. And I think that one of my my assessments of it is that we were all digesting information in a very different way as well, because so many people were working from home, and there've been a number, sadly, of similar events that have happened all around the world. But I think often with very busy lives, we kind of take it in and then move on to the next thing. So people digest information, I think, in a different way to typical. What that meant was that I think there were so many more people than you would typically expect in our organisation who rallied together and said, you know what, we have to make sure that we are a genuinely anti-racist organisation. Because people were feeling hurt, upset, traumatic experiences were being brought to the fore in people's minds. And it wasn't just people from a black or an Asian monoethnic background. It was colleagues who were white as well. People saying, look, we can do better than this. So I pulled together quite a number of people very kind of quickly who'd expressed an interest in getting involved. And to cut a long story short, we've just signed off our own anti-racism leadership charter, which I'll share with yourself, Claire, to share across the network, which sets out, what we will do to be an anti-racist organisation in terms of listening, in terms of educating ourselves. And it can cover all protected characteristics, but we want to make sure that we meet this particular moment. It was also really important that we didn't have a series of well-meaning words, good-meaning words. But we also set out, what would we not tolerate as well. And that came out really strongly from all of the people through our listening sessions and all of the people who have been involved in the crafting of our response to Black Lives Matter. So I think it was an incredible, this summer, when we look back in history, it was an incredible time. And I'm just really hopeful that we're able to, through the sad events that have been experienced, we're really able to use as a launch pad to tackle issues that have been long-standing.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Staynton. And Jo, just a little bit about sort of what the Transport Planning Society are thinking about this, and any sort of reflections on the transport sector response to Black Lives Matter more widely as well.
Yeah, I think it's Staynton. I was just thinking, you reminded me that was in the middle of the summer, wasn't it? Which feels like a long time ago, but it was right when we were grappling with the staying in, coming out of lockdown, lots of other stuff going on. But it was really important, and I think it will become a really important change moment in history. Well, I hope it will. And I think it's easy to feel there's nothing I can do. I'm working at home mostly at the moment. What can I do about it? I couldn't go to an organised event. What do I feel about this? So I think there's a really key, I think your point about listening is so important. Listening to each other, listening to the voices that we're hearing or not hearing, and questioning why we're not hearing them. I think it's really important for all of us to get informed. So reading as widely as you can, making sure you're taking recommendations from organisations that are suggesting books that you can read to get informed about this, because there's really no excuse not to be informed on this topic, and there is loads of really good stuff out there. So making sure we read widely, we ask questions, we question how things are reported in the news, because we're often only hearing one side of those, and sometimes we need to be reminded about those kind of biases that we hear in the news reporting that we're hearing, making sure we are getting all voices heard. And then just to touch on what the Transport Planning Society is doing, we're engaging with our members at the moment. We want to know, and we're engaging with our members, but we also want to engage with people who aren't members yet to find out what it is that would make it more representative to them. Is it that we need do we want to have a special group that represents people from different backgrounds? Do we want to feed into the general conversation? Do they feel represented enough? And I'm just working with a couple of colleagues at the moment to work out what it is that we want to do about that, because I don't think we are representative of the industry. I think it's definitely not good enough, but I think the industry is more diverse than we think it is within the organisation that I'm on the board for. So we want to work with how do we make that happen a bit better. And one of the things we have done this year is I look after the bursary competition for the Transport Planning Society every year, and that encourages young professionals to think about something outside of their day-to-day work. So it gives them the opportunity to go and investigate something, write a paper on it, and then present to board members on their findings. And the topic for this year has been, how do we build an accessible transport system? And that's in its widest possible context. So it's not just about low-floor buses, although they are really important and really good, but looking at the ways that we can make things more accessible to everybody. And we've just had our presentations by our six finalists, and they're all published on the Transport Planning Society website, and they've gone off in such different directions. I feel really enthused about the future of transport, because I think it's really bright and it's really diverse, because they took that topic and went off and looked at things like literacy and where the role that autonomous vehicles play, and so many different directions with that big topic. But there's a really big conversation for us to have. So it's really important that all of us keep that conversation going and action it. So we listen to people and we put some actual actions down. So that sounds fantastic, the work you've been doing, Staynton, because that just sounds like there's some real action behind it, and it's something we can really live by.
Great, thanks very much. And then I just want to pick up one more question before I'll go to the questions that have been asked in the chat. But I just wanted to come back to this point around consultation and bringing people into the planning process. So kind of it's beyond the transport workforce itself, but who can we bring into those consultation processes and make sure that that we're hearing a diverse range of voices. Staynton, perhaps you want to kick us off on that. And I know that TfL have done a lot of interesting work in this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's massively important to us, and we're fortunate to have an engagement team who are incredibly well plugged in to each of the local boroughs, and all of the kind of the community interests that reside within those boroughs. And so I'd say that TfL we're quite fortunate in that it's always been a really important focus for us as an organisation. That doesn't mean, of course, though, we capture all voices all of the time. So that we do have checks and balances to make sure that we are getting the right kind of professional insight to support us with our decision making. So we have an independent disability advisory group in our organisation. They are paid members. And they represent people with from different communities and with different mobility impairments and disabilities too. They're absolutely fantastic. And they now each are budded by someone on our executive committee as well. So there's that kind of reverse mentoring. They work alongside the managing director of LU or the managing director of customer and technology. So they are incredibly well plugged in, and that's to help then inform some of our engagements and consultation with people in different communities, but also to try to be able to plug that gap if we aren't able to talk to every single group that might express an interest or have a point of view about new streetworks and the like. So that's incredibly important. I think it's also, I think it was touched on a bit earlier on by Joe. I think it's really important, and this is something that I think we do pretty well actually. Go into the spaces and places where different groups typically go and reside. That's just good community engagement practice. But sometimes it does take effort. It takes effort because sometimes it's not during the kind of typical 9 till 5 core hours. I led on a piece of work where I engaged with the residents around the Latimer Road station and Grenfell, and the question was, what might we be able to do as a transport authority to support people who are sadly the victims of that terrible fire? And that saw me, alongside a number of other colleagues, spending evenings sometimes in neighbourhood community centres, making sure that we try to work around the different core hours of some of the charities in that local area. And I think, it's about putting in that effort. I don't think it's wholly effortful if you are really determined to get a full panoply and spectrum of responses and views to help inform one's thinking. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Staynton. Joe, do you have anything to add on that?
I think I echo that. I think we should, the transport sector isn't alone in this. We need to learn from really good communications, things that we see in our wider society. And I mean, one that's been key this week, hasn't it, about getting people to get their vaccines. So we need to look at the effort that needs to go into work with community leaders within settings so that members of the community trust say these things and are kind of leading by that, and just look at what's working and look at the effort that needs to go into making that happen. It doesn't just happen, does it? And I think that comes back to my kind of hiding our light under a bushel. This stuff takes hard work, but when we, I do honestly think that when we work together and we collaborate with each other in parts of communities, we can make things so much better and create a better thing for everybody, just as kind of like an offshoot of that. So why would we not do it?
Great, I absolutely agree. Fantastic. So coming to some of the questions in the chat, and it also comes back to something I wanted to pick up on that we sort of touched on earlier, but haven't sort of dug into too much, but is around the importance of flexible working and flexible career options. And I think what we'll take forward from this time in the pandemic, but also how that impacts on different genders. So one of the points in the chat was that often a lot of the domestic and childcare responsibilities fall on women, and will we see more women choosing to work flexibly, work from home, but more men return to the workplace, and what potentially impacts could that have? So I think just it'd be really interesting to get some reflections on sort of the need for flexible working, what we'll keep from the pandemic, and what some of the problems and challenges of that might be. Should we start with Joe, and then I'll come to Staynton next?
Yeah, I think some of that stuff is about leading from the top, isn't it? And being comfortable in the roles that we have. So kind of understanding where different people are coming from. And I think this one thing this has done for us in terms of the pandemic is show that we're all going through something, but we're all facing it in very different situations, aren't we? So some people at the moment are trying to homeschool. Some people are at home on their own and literally only have work that is their only contact with other people and aren't getting out and aren't seeing other people. So I think we need to look at the way we program meetings. We need to look at I don't think until we were all forced to last March, we had exploited video conferencing as much. Lots of people had invested in it and said we were going to do it. But actually, there was still this need to travel everywhere. And face-to-face is really important. We need to look at how we time that and how we do those kind of things. And I think there's that thing about at company level, private or public sector, setting that kind of thing of it's not, I am worried, I saw that question come up, that there is going to be this drive back for men go back to the office and women can't stay and do a lot of the kind of working from home, working flexibly. We can't let that happen. That's making a very sweeping comment. We just cannot let that happen because we are all people. And I think we need to get away from this leaving the rest of my life at the door when I go into my office setting. We're all more rounded people than that. We've all got stuff going on. So I haven't got any kids, but I like to finish work on time on a Tuesday because I run my rainbow group. And that's a commitment I've made. And that's part of my life. And it's really important to me. And it's really important to those 18 kids that I've promised I will be on Zoom at that time at the moment, or in the hall when we meet normally. So I think it's about thinking of, encouraging people to bring their whole lives to work, not just leave it at the office door and then that be very different. I think, it's important to share as much as you want to, but making that possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think there's people who I'd never met in person and I've met on Zoom over this time. And in some ways, I feel like I know them better because I've seen a real glimpse into their lives in a way that you would never get in a face-to-face meeting. But obviously, there's still incredible value in meeting face-to-face too. And I miss that very much as well. So
we've all seen those interviews, haven't we, on television where people's kids have come in and the cats come in and things. And I was worried today that the postman was going to come right while I was presenting. But you know what? There are lives, aren't they? And we're all just working our way through this.
Yeah, definitely. Staynton, any reflections on that?
I think only a couple of things really. I mean, I've got 2 kids under 2. I've got one who's only 5 months old. I've got a kind of lockdown baby. Of course, that wasn't planned. So it's just been, do what you can when you can. And I think so many people are in lots of different situations where you can only just do what you can. And so we've had a mantra, which has been do the right thing kind of at TfL to try to make sure that we offer as much flexibility as possible to individuals depending on their circumstances. And everybody, of course, in every else's organisations has been affected. People's lives have bubbled to the surface. And there's less of a place for that stuff to be covered or unknown. So we've got to kind of, I think, hold on to that. There's a major concern, particularly with lockdown 3. There is a major concern that the childbearing responsibilities typically fall on women, and that's creating a strain. I think in society more broadly, particularly with the issues with regard to school openings. I'm not going to get into that. That's way above my pay grades and get into the politics of school openings and so forth. But we talked about this last week on our top 300 leadership call, and it's just to continue to reinforce. We just have to be as forgiving and as flexible as possible, and making sure that we try to do the right thing. The one thing I would say as a note of caution, I suppose, and as we kind of, what are the good things we want to kind of hold on to? I think it's going to be really important for organisations to think about, the technology that are within offices, so that if there is still going to be working from home, we don't want to lose some of this stuff. In 2 years, 3 years time, you don't create a 2-track kind of a system whereby some people are in the office, having those water cooler conversations. There's not meeting webcam set up in meeting rooms. So all of a sudden then the onus falls wholly on people working from home to make the adjustments to fit in with people who are in the office. And I think that's something for all organisations to think very, very carefully about going forward.
Great, thanks very much. We're starting to run out of time, and I'm afraid I haven't got through very many of the questions in the chat, but it's been such an engaging and enjoyable conversation, and perhaps we can take some of these further conversations onto Twitter using the hashtag, and we'll pick some of that conversation up over there as well. But I just want to say thank you to our speakers. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been really valuable, and I'll hand back over to Jonathan to just wrap us up.
Thanks, Joe, Staynton and Clare, for what was a really fascinating discussion and conversation. And there's so much rich content there. But a few phrases that stuck out for me. We're doing better than we were, but there's a lot more still to do. Be friendly and flexible. And picking up on that last end of the conversation, that was fascinating. A lot of thinking to do around how we take some of the best of what the pandemic has inflicted on us and take that forward. The power of real life lived examples. I think some of the short films that TfL have done about their staff and the lives they live and the jobs they do are absolutely fantastic and worth checking out if you haven't seen them. How does an organisation look and feel all the time? It's not just when recruiting, it's what the atmosphere is. It's how it comes across all the time is important. Getting the most out of inclusive meetings, and I'd love to hear more from Staynton offline or whenever about what TfL are doing in that area, because I'm sure we could all learn from that. And transport is a fabulous career, and it is for everybody. So thank you, and I hope you'll be able to join us for the next Urban Transport Next event, which is U2N03 on 24th of February at 1 p.m, when the topic will be the Tyne and Wear Metro at 40, what next for Britain's innovation railway, where we'll be exploring the history of this unique and groundbreaking mass transit system, from how it came about in the first place to what the future holds, including how it might expand further. So I hope you can join us for that. And in the meantime, thanks again to our panel and to everyone who took part live, and for those listening in to the podcast or watching the playback on YouTube. Thank you and goodbye.